When scholars first uncovered the oldest Sumerian tablets, they expected routine records, lists of grain, temple offerings, names of kings. Instead, they found something far stranger. Some of the clay tablets described a moment when the sky seemed to open, when light behaved in ways no storm could explain, and when the earth itself was said to have been wounded during what the scribes called the conflict of the Anunnaki. These ancient writers spoke of rivers boiling, fields turning dark, and great tremors rolling across the land. And what unsettled researchers most was that the Sumerians didn't describe these events as myths. They wrote them as memories. I'm glad you're here tonight. Truly. If it's late where you are, and your thoughts feel a little heavy, just settle in with me for a moment. We're stepping into a story that's both ancient and strangely human. A story about a people trying to understand forces far beyond their control. And I'm grateful you chose to spend part of your night exploring it with me. Across museums in Baghdad, London, and Istanbul, archaeologists have collected thousands of these tablets. Most record everyday details: taxes, trade, rituals, astronomy. But scattered among them are descriptions of something different. A bright, overwhelming force the Sumerians called Melum, a kind of radiant power associated with the gods. Some tablets describe cities trembling when this radiance appeared. Others mention canals so hot the water ran away, or fields that stayed barren for years after a divine conflict. Mainstream scholars usually interpret these as poetic descriptions of real disasters, droughts, invasions, volcanic ash drifting over the plains around 2200 BCE. But alternative researchers point out how precise the details are. Sudden temperature spikes, skies darken so completely that scribes compared them to night. Shockwaves moving in rings. These aren't broad myths. They read like eyewitness accounts of something the writers didn't quite understand. But we're not here to settle that debate. That's not the purpose of nights like this. We're here to walk slowly through what the Sumerians remembered, or believed, or feared. We'll look at what the evidence can tell us, and we'll leave space for the parts that remain uncertain. These ancient people lived close to their land. When something changed, when the sky dimmed, when the earth cracked, they noticed, and they tried to write it down in the only language they had. Before we go deeper, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders loosen a bit. Notice the air where you're sitting. Cool, warm, still, or quietly moving. And if you're comfortable sharing in your mind, where are you listening from tonight? A quiet bedroom, a dim living room, somewhere you finally have a moment to yourself. Wherever you are, you're in the right place. And if these calm explorations into ancient history help you sleep, help you think, or just keep you company during long evenings, feel free to like or subscribe. It genuinely helps others who need this kind of peaceful storytelling discover it too. As we move forward, imagine the land where all of this took place, the old Mesopotamian plain, wide, flat, crisscrossed by the Tigris and Euphrates. Long before cities rose, long before temples reached for the sky, this land held quiet secrets in its soil, layers of flood, drought, and sunlight, layers of change, layers of memory. And this is where our journey continues, into the world that existed before the conflict the tablets describe, the untouched landscape that shaped the first stories of the Sumerians. Across the southern Mesopotamian plain, the world looked very different long before the Sumerians carved their first signs into clay. Wind moved across wide stretches of marshland, and the air carried the smell of wet reeds and slow-moving water. When the morning sun rose over this landscape, it reflected off shallow pools that stretched so far they blurred into the horizon. This was a world not yet shaped by kings, temples, or tablets. A world that waited quietly for the first humans to settle and build. And if you stood there, thousands of years before the earliest cities appeared, the land would feel open in a way that is hard to imagine now. Soft ground beneath you, a warm breeze on your face, and the steady song of insects drifting across the water. Long before writing or agriculture, the region was fed by two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. They shaped everything. When the rivers flooded, they brought layers of rich silt from the mountains to the north, spreading it across the plain like a blank page waiting to be written on. When the waters retreated, they left behind dark soil that could grow almost anything. This cycle, flood, retreat, renewal, continued year after year, long before humans understood why it happened. And if you were to touch that soil, still damp from the last flood, it would feel cool and fine, almost like powder between your fingers. Rising from the plain, small islands of firmer ground created natural gathering spots. People came and went with the seasons, hunting, fishing, and collecting plants that grew along the marsh edges. Evidence suggests that by 7000 BCE, small groups had begun shaping the land in simple ways, building reed shelters, digging shallow channels, lighting fires that left layers of ash now found by archaeologists. Perhaps they didn't yet imagine cities, or temples, or stories about gods descending from the sky. Maybe all they wanted was a safe place to sleep, a steady source of food, and the comfort of moving together as a community beneath open sky. When the nights were clear, the stars appeared with a sharpness we rarely see today. No smoke, no lights, no crowded horizons. Just an enormous sky stretching from one riverbank to the other. Standing there, you would notice how slowly the constellations drifted, how the Milky Way arched overhead like a pale river mirroring the dark ones below. It's possible that the earliest people on this plane began to recognize patterns in the sky long before they ever built structures to measure them. The quiet rhythm of starlight may have been one of the first teachers of time. Across this landscape, animals moved with seasonal patterns. Herds of gazelle crossed dry fields in graceful waves. Wild pigs rooted near the edges of the marsh. Birds migrated in thick clouds during spring and autumn, filling the air with their calls. The land was not empty. It was alive in ways that shaped human behavior long before civilization took form. When the heat built during the afternoon, you would hear the land grow still, almost holding its breath until the temperature dropped again. And when the wind swept through the reeds, it produced a low rustling that sounded almost like distant whispering. Before the Sumerians emerged, the climate here was slightly wetter than today. Rainfall in the north fed the rivers more generously, and the marshes expanded further than the modern map shows. This wetter climate encouraged growth, plant growth, settlement growth, and eventually cultural growth. The stage was being set, slowly, patiently, for something new. Geological cores pulled from the plain show alternating layers of clay and silt, measuring between 2 and 5 centimeters, each layer marking a different flood season. Those layers tell a quiet, steady story of a land preparing itself for human invention. Imagine walking across that early landscape. Your feet sink lightly into the damp ground. The sun warms your shoulders. The distant call of water birds echoes across the marsh. There are no walls yet, No boundaries, no sound of tools shaping stone. Just the feeling of a world beginning to gather itself, as if waiting for someone to recognize its potential. Perhaps the people who lived here sensed that potential even before they had words to describe it. The land offered food, shelter, and safety. And those three things are often the seeds of every civilization. At night, when the wind settled and the water grew still, the reflections of stars on the marsh surface created the illusion of a sky beneath your feet. Observers might have seen this mirrored world and wondered if the heavens and the earth were connected in some deeper way. Later Sumerian texts describe the sky as a dome, and the earth as a flat plane resting beneath it, separated but linked. Maybe those ideas began during nights like this, when early humans watched the stars shimmer on water and felt the quiet presence of something larger than themselves. Archaeologists studying the earliest settlements, places like Tel el-Weli and Chogamami, have uncovered simple mud brick houses, pottery shards, and traces of early farming. Wheat varieties dating to around 6000 BCE appear in storage, pits, along with tools shaped from flint and obsidian. These settlements were small, but they marked a shift from wandering to staying. Staying brings memory, and memory becomes culture. This slow transition laid the groundwork for everything the Sumerians would later build. Take a breath here. Let the image settle. A wide plain, rivers weaving through it, sky stretching above it, and small groups of early people beginning to make sense of their world. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just a long unfolding preparation. When the first light touched the Mesopotamian plain thousands of years before the rise of cities, the land revealed a quiet power shaped by two forces older than humanity itself: water and fire. The rivers carved their patient paths, weaving through mud and reeds, while far to the north, volcanic ridges and shifting mountains released minerals that traveled downstream each year. If you stood on the plain at dawn, long before writing existed, you would smell damp, earth mixed with a faint mineral sharpness carried by the wind. The ground under your feet would feel soft in some places, firmer in others, each layer telling a different chapter of its long geological story. Long before the Sumerians emerged, the plain was not a single continuous stretch of land. It moved, it breathed. Flood spread across it in slow sheets, leaving behind layers of silt that could reach 10-20 centimeters in a single season. When the floodwaters retreated, they exposed soil so fertile that it darkened visibly under the sun. Archaeological soil cores show alternating stripes of clay, silt, and ash, evidence of river floods, drought cycles, and occasional eruptions from faraway volcanic chains. Each layer is a quiet reminder of how the earth was shaping the stage for future civilizations. And when you touch such soil today in excavation samples, it crumbles between your fingers like soft chalk, still carrying a memory of the water that once held it together. Across this landscape, marshes stretched outward in every direction. The smell of wet reeds, decaying plant matter, and warm mud rose into the air, creating an environment both rich and unpredictable. Early humans would have walked carefully through tall grasses that brushed against their legs. Maybe the sound of frogs, birds, and insects created a constant living hum around them. And when the afternoon heat pressed down, the marshlands settled into a slow, heavy stillness, the kind that makes you breathe a little deeper without noticing. Long before humans built canals, the rivers changed course on their own. A sudden rise in water could carve an entirely new channel, leaving the old one to dry out. These shifts created patches of land perfect for early settlement, but they also forced communities to move often. Geological analyses show abandoned riverbeds stretching for kilometers, each one a trace of a waterway that once supported life, then vanished. Such change may have influenced later Sumerian beliefs that the gods controlled the waters, because in those early days, water could give life or take it away without warning. When night settled across the plain, the sky became the dominant feature of the landscape. With no cities, no fires large enough to challenge the darkness, the stars appeared bright and numerous. Standing beneath that sky, early people would have seen constellations rising and falling in patterns that repeated year after year. Some stars drifted slowly, others flashed briefly as meteors, and the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a pale river, mirroring the waterways below. It's possible that the movement of stars helped early communities understand the passing seasons before they understood the rivers themselves. A quiet link formed between sky and earth long before anyone tried to explain it. When the climate shifted, as it sometimes did, the plain responded dramatically. During wetter periods, marshes expanded, attracting birds and wildlife. During drier periods, winds swept across exposed land, carrying fine dust that settled in shallow layers. Archaeologists have measured dust deposits as thin as 1 millimeter and as thick as 3 centimeters in certain locations, each layer marking a year or more of difficult living conditions. Perhaps early humans noticed these changes and adapted by moving toward areas where the rivers still flowed strongly. Maybe they understood that the land had rhythms, even if they didn't yet have words for them. Far to the north, fire played its own part in shaping the world. The Taurus and Zagros mountains held dormant volcanic fields, and small eruptions in distant periods released ash that drifted southward. Only trace amounts reached the plain, but even those small deposits changed soil chemistry slightly. Modern analysis shows thin gray streaks, volcanic ash layers measuring just 1 to 2 millimeters, preserved beneath settlements. They act like quiet geological signatures, reminders that the landscape was influenced by forces far beyond the marshlands. If you were standing on the plain during one of those distant eruptions, you might notice the sky dimming slightly, a coolness in the air, or a faint dusty smell carried on the wind. Water shaped the land gently. Fire shaped it indirectly. Together, they created a world capable of supporting large communities long before those communities realized their potential. The plain became a broad, open cradle, flat, fertile, and offering everything necessary for settlement. People could hunt along the marsh edges, gather reeds for shelter, and find freshwater pools fed by side channels of the rivers. In a landscape like this, stability grows slowly, and stability leads to memory, routine, and eventually, innovation. When archaeologists examine early settlement layers today, they find traces of reed huts, fire pits, and storage areas. In one site, a layer only 40 centimeters thick contains more than 300 small artifacts, tools, bone fragments, pottery pieces, each one showing that people spent enough time here to leave behind parts of their daily lives. These findings hint at communities just beginning to settle, no longer drifting endlessly. Maybe they noticed how the land responded to rain and wind. Maybe they learned where the soil stayed firmest during floods. And over time, these small observations became knowledge passed from generation to generation. Take a moment here. Picture that landscape. Wide open, shining with pooled water. Warm reeds brushing in the wind. the distant mountains barely visible through a soft haze. It's quiet, unhurried, a world preparing itself. And as the land shaped itself through cycles of water and fire, humans slowly began shaping it in return. That gentle shift leads us toward the next stage, the first signs of organized life, the first footprints of a rising civilization. When the sun dipped beneath the horizon in the ancient Mesopotamian plain, the sky transformed into something vast and unbroken. Long before the first cities appeared, long before the earliest temples rose from mud brick foundations, people looked upward and saw a night sky so clear and so crowded with stars that it must have felt like another world hanging above their own. The air carried the mild coolness that settles over wetlands after sunset. The marshes quieted, the insects softened their calls, and the sky became the dominant presence, a silent watcher of every early human footstep across the plain. Long before the Sumerians recorded celestial movements, early groups walked beneath those same stars without any tools to measure them. They relied on their senses, the glow of the moon on water, the slow drift of star clusters, the way dawn crept in from the east with a faint pink shimmer. If you were there, standing barefoot on damp ground, you would feel the temperature drop gently on your skin. You might catch the faint smell of river mud cooling after a warm day. And overhead, the Milky Way would stretch like a pale band of mist, bright enough to reflect on shallow pools and make the world feel doubled. Sky above, sky below. When the nights were long, the constellations moved slowly across the horizon in predictable arcs. This rhythm, steady, patient, unchanging, became one of the earliest patterns humans noticed. Evidence suggests that by 6000 BCE, communities were already gathering seasonal knowledge from the sky, even if they didn't leave written records. Maybe they learned which stars rose when the river began to swell. Maybe they noticed when a brilliant planet appeared just before planting seasons. Over time, these small observations became part of the memory of the land. And the sky, in its vast silence, held those memories without effort. Across the plain, the ground underfoot told a quieter story. As people moved with the seasons, they left behind faint traces, footprints hardened into mud layers, scattered reed fragments, remains of small fire pits. Later, archaeological digs uncovered these layers stacked like pages, each one showing a moment of human presence. A patch of ash measuring 3 centimeters thick. A cluster of fish bones found near a buried hearth. A fragment of obsidian transported from distant mountains. These findings show how early communities interacted with the world long before there were towns or rulers. They lived lightly, leaving marks the sky could watch, but the land often erased. When the moon rose full and bright, its reflection on the marshes created shimmering paths of light. Early observers may have followed these natural sky mirrors without realizing they were creating the first mental maps of the region. The moonlight showed safe crossings through shallow pools. It revealed the silhouettes of distant reed beds. And it softened everything, the hills, the riverbanks, even the faces of the people walking quietly between camps. Nights like these probably shaped the earliest Sumerian ideas about the moon as a guiding force in the world, long before the god Nana was worshipped in Ur. In the northern sky, stars circled a fixed point, a slow, steady movement humans could trust. To early groups, this may have provided a sense of orientation even before the invention of tools. Standing beneath that sky, you could feel how large the world was, and yet how connected your footsteps were to everything above. Perhaps that feeling of connection helped shape later beliefs that the earth and the heavens were parts of one great structure, different but intertwined. And maybe the comfort of repeating star paths gave people the confidence to remain in one place longer than before. Wind moved across the plain at night in soft currents. It carried with it the scent of wet earth, reeds, and distant fires. The sound of that wind, low, constant, unhurried, may have been one of the first voices the land offered. Early people listened to it carefully. Wind signaled changes in weather. It hinted at approaching storms. And when the rivers began to rise from distant rainfall, the breeze shifted temperature slightly. These sensory cues shaped behavior long before written calendars existed. The land spoke, and people learned to hear it. When archaeologists study early soil layers today, they find microdeposits of pollen, ash, and mineral dust, each only a fraction of a millimeter thick. Under a microscope, these tiny materials reveal climate patterns, river cycles, and vegetation shifts across thousands of years. In one core sample taken near ancient Eridu, researchers documented a thick band of marsh pollen dating to roughly 5,500 BCE, proof that the land was once more flooded, lush, and full of life than it is today. These scientific details help us reconstruct the world that existed before the first cities rose. And they remind us that the earliest Sumerians inherited a landscape already shaped by countless generations. Take a moment and breathe. Picture that world, calm water reflecting starlight, warm evening air settling across open plains, quiet footsteps moving through reeds. Nothing hurried, nothing forced, just sky watching land, and land supporting life in small, steady ways. This is the foundation on which everything else would be built. And as those first communities continued to walk beneath that vast sky, something subtle began to shift. The land offered abundance. The rivers offered stability. Memory began to accumulate. People stayed longer, built more, tried new things. When the first settled communities began to form across the Mesopotamian plain, the shift was gentle enough that it left only faint traces in the soil. Long before the great cities of Ur, Uruk, and Lagash rose, there were clusters of huts built from reeds and mud, arranged in loose circles that followed the curve of ancient riverbanks. If you were standing there around 6500 BCE, you would feel the soft give of damp earth under your feet. You might smell the faint sweetness of drying reeds warming in the sun. These early settlements were quiet, humble beginnings, small enough that the sky still felt larger than everything humans had built. Archaeologists working across the region have uncovered these earliest layers almost by accident. Many lie just 50-80 centimeters beneath the modern surface, pressed into thin strata of dark soil. At Tel el-Uwaili, one of the most important early sites, researchers uncovered fragments of mud brick walls only 20 centimeters thick, baked hard by ancient sun. Carbon dating places them around 6200-6000 BCE, making them some of the earliest architectural remains in southern Mesopotamia. When these bricks are touched today, they crumble slightly at the edges, yet retain a surprising firmness at the core. A reminder that even simple materials can endure for millennia when shaped by steady hands. Across these early settlements, archaeologists found storage pits lined with reed mats, each pit measuring roughly 1 meter across. Inside them were charred seeds of barley and emmer wheat, early evidence of farming. The seeds themselves are tiny, often less than 6 millimeters long, yet they represent a profound shift in human life, the move from gathering to cultivating. This transition didn't happen all at once. Maybe it began when early groups noticed certain plants returning year after year in the same places. Maybe they began scattering seeds intentionally before they understood the long-term consequences. Either way, the land began to respond, and the people began to stay. Long before writing appeared, pottery became one of the most reliable markers of emerging culture. Sherds found in early layers show distinct changes in style, texture, and firing technique. At some sites, archaeologists uncovered fragments so smooth they still hold a faint sheen from fine burnishing. Others contain visible bits of straw temper, added to prevent cracking during firing. The colors range from pale buff to deep reddish brown, depending on the clay source. These small variations tell a larger story, that communities were learning, experimenting, and passing down knowledge across generations. Each pottery shard is a quiet teacher, offering clues to skills once practiced daily. When archaeologists examined artifacts from the earliest Ubaid period, circa 5500–4000 BCE, they noticed something intriguing. Many objects showed signs of standardization. Clay figurines had similar proportions. Pottery shapes repeated with consistent dimensions. Even house layouts began to follow recognizable patterns, often with a central room measuring about 4 by 6 meters and smaller side chambers branching from it. Standardization hints at shared values, shared knowledge, and shared identity. Perhaps the people living here had begun to think of themselves not just as families, but as communities, a crucial step towards civilization. Long before the first ziggurats appeared, the land itself became a palimpsest of human activity. Layers of ash, crushed pottery, and compacted earth accumulated slowly. In one early settlement layer, archaeologists discovered a series of hearths arranged in a rough line, each one spaced about 2 meters apart. The ash thickness varied from 1 to 3 centimeters, suggesting repeated use. When you look at these hearths today, it's easy to imagine small groups gathered around them, talking softly, tending fires, listening to the night sounds. Fire brought warmth, protection, and routine. Routine gave rise to memory. Memory eventually became culture. As settlement patterns stabilized, simple burial practices began to appear. At some sites, shallow graves were discovered just outside early dwelling areas. The bodies were placed on their sides, knees drawn up, often wrapped in reed mats. Grave goods were minimal. A tutas, small pot here, a bead there. These burials reveal a tender truth. Even before cities, humans honored their dead. The land held these memories quietly, and the sky watched without changing. Perhaps these early rituals planted the seeds of later religious beliefs, including the grand stories of gods, creation, and cosmic order that would fill Sumerian temples thousands of years later. Across all these discoveries, several mysteries remain. Why did some settlements flourish while others were abandoned? What encouraged certain groups to experiment with irrigation while others continued seasonal movement? And how did these early people interpret the land's constant shifts, the floods, winds, and changing river paths? Archaeologists can measure soil layers, date pottery fragments, and map ancient water channels. But the thoughts of the people themselves, those remain partly beyond reach. That gentle gap between evidence and imagination is where wonder lives. Take a slow breath here. Picture the plain as it was. Soft light over open water, the distant call of birds, small clusters of reed houses standing quietly near the edge of a shifting river. People moving in unhurried patterns. Children gathering reeds. Adults tending hearths. The world was simple, but not empty. It held possibility. And as these early groups learned to stay, to cultivate, to build, The foundations of a future civilization were quietly forming. The next step would not be accidental, it would be intentional, communities choosing to shape the land in new ways. When the first unmistakable traces of organized life began to emerge across the southern Mesopotamian plain, they appeared not as grand monuments or sweeping cities, but as patterns, lines in the soil, repeated house shapes, tools shaped the same way again and again. If you were standing on this land around 5200 BCE, the air would feel warm on your skin, carrying hints of river mud and sun-dried clay. You'd see dwellings, arranged with quiet intention, their reed walls rustling softly in the breeze. It was no longer a landscape of wandering groups. Something steadier was forming, choices, routines, and the early signs of what we now call civilization. Across early Ubaid settlements, archaeologists uncovered long rectangular houses with central halls measuring roughly 4 by 6 meters, flanked by narrow side rooms. The floors were smoothed mud, cool under the fingertips, and in some cases still bore faint impressions of woven mats. Nearby, clay sickles with worn edges showed where early farmers harvested grain. Carbon dating places many of these artifacts between 5200 and 4800 BCE. What fascinates researchers is the consistency. Similar measurements, similar layouts, similar tools across dozens of sites. These patterns are the fingerprints of a culture beginning to recognize itself, long before anyone carved symbols into clay. One of the most compelling discoveries from this period comes from Eridu, often called the oldest city in Sumerian tradition. Excavations revealed more than 16 layers of temples built one atop another, each dating to a different era, but anchored to the same sacred spot. The earliest layers, dating to around 5000 BCE, were simple mud brick platforms, no larger than a modern dining room. Yet even these early structures show signs of deliberate orientation. Their corners align closely with cardinal directions, deviating only a few degrees. This level of precision suggests a growing cultural attention to order, perhaps spiritual, perhaps practical. Maybe the early builders noticed how shadows fell across the plain. Maybe they learned how the sun traced its path and shaped their structures to follow it. Each possibility hints at a mind beginning to look beyond survival. In 1946, during a hot afternoon at the site of Tel Abu Shahrain, ancient Eridu, archaeologist Fuad Safar knelt beside a narrow trench as dust clung to his forearms. The sun reflected harshly off the pale earth, and the air carried the dry scent of old clay. He had been following a faint line of mud brick that disappeared deeper into the soil, expecting yet another Ubaid period wall. Nothing unusual, just another quiet layer of history. But as he brushed away the dirt with a small reed brush, the texture beneath his fingers changed. These bricks were smaller, only about 24 centimeters long, and fired harder than the ones above them. Safar paused, examined the joinery, and immediately sensed something older. The next few minutes turned urgent in the careful way archaeologists work. Assistants widened the trench. More bricks emerged, then a platform, then a narrow doorway sealed by a collapsed beam. When the team measured the orientation and compared the brick type with known layers, they realized the structure sat deeper than any previously identified temple foundation. The moment quieted the entire dig site. They were not just uncovering a building. They were lowering the timeline of Eridu's earliest sacred architecture by almost 300 years. By sunset, Safar stood beside a shallow pit filled with newly exposed walls. The golden light softened the brick edges, making them look almost warm. He recorded the measurements, brick size, wall thickness, orientation, then closed his notebook with a slow exhale. The discovery reshaped the chronology of early southern Mesopotamia. A temple far older than expected meant organized religious practice emerged earlier, too. Patterns of culture, belief, and ritual reached deeper into the past than scholars had assumed. And all of it began with a few bricks that felt different beneath a brush. Findings like these help archaeologists trace how early communities shifted from simple settlements to organized centers. At many sites, clay tokens, small objects shaped like spheres, cones, and discs, begin to appear around 4500 BCE. These tokens often measure between 1 and 3 centimeters, their surfaces smoothed with care. Scholars believe they served as counting tools, perhaps representing livestock, grain, or goods. This early accounting system suggests that trade and record-keeping began long before writing. The tokens whisper a simple truth. People were thinking abstractly, using objects to represent ideas. In the same layers, fishing weights made from perforated clay, typically 5 to 7 centimeters across, show how communities made use of the marsh environment. Net weights appear in clusters, pulled from the soil in groups of 4 or 5. When archaeologists hold them today, they feel cool, dense, and smooth in the palm. Their discovery shows how early economies relied not only on farming, but on river and marsh resources. The people here knew their land intimately. They shaped tools not to dominate it, but to live within its cycles. Not every puzzle has been solved. Why did some early sites expand while others remained small? Why are some layers rich in pottery while others show almost none? And what led certain communities to experiment with early kilns, producing fired pottery at temperatures around 600, 900 degrees Celsius, while neighboring groups still used sun-dried clay? These questions remain open. Archaeology offers pieces of the puzzle, but rarely the entire picture. Yet that partiality is part of its quiet beauty. Take a moment here. Picture a cluster of early houses under a warm dawn sky, smoke rising gently from hearths, the faint smell of clay and burning reeds drifting upward. People move slowly, carrying baskets, tending fires, preparing for another day. The land has become familiar to them. The river paths are predictable. The rhythms of nature feel steady. When the earliest communities began forming across the southern Mesopotamian plain, something subtle shifted in the layers they left behind. Tools became more refined, houses became more deliberate, and most importantly, the first hints of shared stories appeared. Not written stories yet, but symbols, patterns, and ritual objects that show people were beginning to think in ways that stretched beyond daily survival. If you stood beside one of these early villages around 4200 BCE, the morning air would feel cool against your skin, carrying the smell of damp clay and distant hearth smoke. You'd hear the low murmur of people grinding grain, the soft rustle of reeds, and the splash of someone stepping into shallow water. Beneath these ordinary sounds, a deeper current was forming, the beginning of cultural identity. Across several Ubaid sites, archaeologists found small figurines made of baked clay. Many of them measure between 8 and 12 centimeters tall. Their features are stylized, elongated heads, narrow bodies, and delicate arms pressed against their sides. Some figurines have painted bands across the torso, while others show faint incised lines. Scholars debate their purpose. Some believe they represent deities, others suggest they were household talismans, and a few propose they served as educational tools, small enough to be held and passed from hand to hand. Whatever their function, These objects are among the earliest hints that the people living here were forming shared beliefs, ideas larger than a single person, carried from one generation to the next. Pottery designs also began to shift. Instead of simple utilitarian shapes, vessels from around 4400–4000 BCE show carefully painted patterns, spirals, chevrons, and looping lines that seem to move around the bowl when viewed in flickering firelight. The paint is usually a dark mineral pigment, applied in bands 1 to 3 centimeters thick. These patterns may have represented water, wind, or movement, echoing the natural world that shaped daily life. When archaeologists handle these vessels now, they often comment on the surprising smoothness of the clay, the fine grain of the temper, and the steady hand required to paint such precise lines. These pots were not rushed creations. They reflect intention, patience, and the beginnings of aesthetic expression. At the same time, settlement sizes increased. Early house clusters expanded from small groups of 8 to 10 structures to larger communities with more than 50 dwellings. Paths began to form between homes, packed down by footsteps over generations. Hearths were placed with surprising consistency, often on the east side of rooms to catch morning light. Storage areas grew larger, and clay-lined pits reached depths of 60–80 centimeters, capable of holding enough grain for entire families through dry seasons. These architectural choices show a people planning for the future, thinking months ahead rather than days. That shift in thinking is a quiet but powerful sign of cultural emergence. In 1919, during a warm spring morning near the site of Al Ubaid, archaeologist Henry Hall knelt beside a shallow trench while the scent of sun-warmed clay drifted through the air. The soil was soft that day, tinted a pale greenish gray from mineral deposits. Hall noticed a curved shape peeking through the dirt, smooth on one side, rough on the other. He called for a fine brush, expecting another broken bowl fragment. But as he brushed gently, the curve revealed a painted edge, then a full spiral, then an entire bowl nearly intact. The vessel was larger than most, almost 28 centimeters wide, and painted with 2 elegant black spirals that met at the center. The more he cleaned, the more the pattern emerged, twisting gracefully around the clay surface. When light hit the bowl at a certain angle, the pattern almost seemed to move. Hall recorded the measurements, examined the brushstrokes, and realized that this discovery wasn't simply a well-made pot. It represented a level of artistic intention earlier than previously documented in the region. This one object pushed the timeline of symbolic expression deeper into the past. Hall placed the restored bowl on a wooden board, watching how sunlight slid across its surface. In that quiet moment, he understood something simple but profound. The people who made this bowl were not just surviving, they were expressing themselves. The bowl became one of the key artifacts linking early Mesopotamian settlements to the beginnings of Sumerian cultural identity. As communities grew, so did their interactions. Trade routes began to form along natural river corridors. Small beads made of carnelian, a reddish-orange stone sourced from regions far to the east, appeared in burials from around 4200 BCE. These beads, usually 4 or 7 millimeters long, show that early settlements were connected through exchange networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. The presence of foreign materials inside graves suggests increasing social complexity. People valued certain objects enough to carry them into the afterlife. Clay tokens also multiplied. Spherical tokens representing grain, cone-shaped tokens representing livestock. These serve not only practical purposes, but also mental ones, encouraging abstract thinking, encouraging individuals to see objects as symbols. The earliest steps toward writing were beginning silently, almost invisibly. By 4000 BCE, some tokens were enclosed in clay envelopes called bullae, marked with impressions that previewed the future cuneiform script. These impressions measured only a few millimeters each, yet they traveled across time as one of humanity's earliest record-keeping systems. Of course, many mysteries remain. Why did some settlements adopt symbolic pottery while others continued more practical forms? Why did figurines vary so widely in shape and style? And what inspired early builders to align their structures with the cardinal directions so precisely? Archaeologists can measure, date, compare, and theorize. But the thoughts behind these early choices still belong partly to silence. That quiet space invites reflection, not certainty. Take a moment and breathe slowly. Picture a settlement at dusk, the warm glow of hearths, the smell of baked clay, the soft movement of people completing their final tasks of the day. Above them, the first stars flicker into view. Stories are forming, not yet written, but already shaping identity and memory. When the settlement at Eridu grew from a cluster of reed huts into something far more deliberate, the land itself seemed to shift in character. The air over the plain carried new scents, the sharper smell of kiln fires, the earthy warmth of sun-baked mud brick, the faint trace of cooked grain drifting from communal hearths. If you walked through Eridu around 3800 BCE, long before it became a legendary city in Sumerian tradition, you would hear a quiet hum of activity. Soft footsteps on packed earth, wooden tools knocking against clay, voices echoing gently through open courtyards. A world that once held only scattered homes was beginning to pulse with organized life, archaeological layers. From this period, show buildings far larger than those of earlier centuries. Mud brick walls measure 40 to 60 centimeters thick, providing insulation against intense summer heat. Floors were plastered with gypsum, creating smooth surfaces that remained cool under bare feet. Storage rooms, some nearly 3 meters long, held clay jars designed to seal grain tightly. Measurements from excavation drawings show consistent architectural planning. Central halls aligned with the rising sun, side rooms arranged symmetrically, doorways widening slightly toward the interior to distribute weight. These choices reveal not just craftsmanship, but intention. People were building with purpose now, not just necessity. Eridu's earliest temples, found beneath later construction layers, provide some of the clearest evidence of this shift. The smallest shrine, dating to around 5000 BCE, was just a modest platform. But by 3800 BCE, the temple had grown larger, its walls reinforced with buttresses, its courtyard carefully leveled. Archaeologists note traces of white plaster on some brick surfaces, a bright coating that would have reflected sunlight, making the temple glow faintly against the landscape. When researchers touch surviving fragments, they describe their texture as fine and slightly chalky, almost soft despite their age. These materials were not accidental. Someone chose them for effect, for symbolism, for meaning. As the settlement expanded, so did its social rhythms. Excavations uncovered large communal ovens, their interiors baked to a deep orange color from repeated firing. These ovens could reach temperatures of 600, 800 dioxi, enough to process bread for many families at once. Nearby, refuse pits revealed diets of fish, barley bread, dates, and occasionally goat or sheep. The smells of such meals, smoky, sweet, earthy, would have mingled with the scents of drying clay and burning reeds. Daily life no longer revolved around mere survival. It revolved around shared effort, shared meals, shared rituals. When the sun set, Eridu transformed again. Oil lamps carved from clay or stone cast warm, flickering light across courtyard walls. Their wicks, often made from twisted reeds soaked in animal fat, produced a faint crackling sound as they burned. Shadows stretched long across plastered floors, moving with each shift of the flame. Above, the stars emerged, the same stars that guided generations before, but now watched by people who were beginning to interpret them differently. Some scholars believe this period marks the earliest attempts to track lunar cycles systematically. Perhaps someone noticed that ceremonies timed with new moons felt more meaningful. Perhaps sky observation slowly became structured practice. Trade connections also grew. Clay tablets from later periods reference goods moving from north to south, but the earliest evidence appears in material rather than writing. Obsidian from eastern Anatolia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and shells from the Persian Gulf all appear in archaeological layers associated with Eridu's growth. Many objects are small: beads, tools, inlays, typically measuring less than 3 centimeters. But their presence speaks loudly. People were traveling, exchanging goods, and carrying distant stories with them. A world that once felt local began to widen. Not all developments are fully understood. Why did Eridu become the sacred center in later Sumerian memory, even though other cities eventually surpassed it in size? Why did its temple remain a fixed point for centuries? And what caused periodic rebuilding, simple renovation, or responses to environmental events? Soil samples beneath early temple layers show thin, dark bands rich in organic material, possibly indicating brief periods of abandonment or flooding. These details raise questions, but not certainty. Archaeology often reveals what happened, but not always why. Take a slow breath here. Picture Eridu at dusk, the quiet laughter of families walking home, the warm glow of lamps, the faint echoes of chants from the temple courtyard. The air is thick with the scent of clay and river water. Children run across packed earth. Elders sit near doorways, watching the sky shift from blue to deep violet. Everything is changing, but gently, naturally, carried by the momentum of life gathering into form. This is the threshold of the Golden Age, a moment when settlements transformed into cities, when memory became ritual, and when the first foundations of Sumerian identity grew strong enough to last millennia. When the Sumerian cities reached their height, the land that once held only scattered villages transformed into a constellation of human brilliance. Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, Nippur, each one rose from the plain like a crafted star placed intentionally upon the earth. If you were walking toward Uruk around 3300 BCE, the heat would press gently against your skin, carrying the mixed scents of baked clay, roasting grain, and distant river water. You'd hear soft rhythmic knocks from workshops, quiet conversations drifting through narrow lanes, and the steady footsteps of people who now lived within a world shaped by shared purpose. Civilization was no longer emerging. It was shining. Imagine standing at the outskirts of Uruk as dawn rose over the eastern sky. Light would spill across towering mud brick walls nearly 9 meters tall, their surfaces smoothed with fine plaster. The city plan revealed intention. Streets laid out to funnel wind, courtyards designed to stay cool, even in intense heat. Canals nearly 4 meters wide brought water directly into the city center, their surfaces glimmering with early sunlight. Workers carried woven baskets filled with clay. Merchants arranged fish in neat rows. Priests moved with calm deliberation toward temple complexes. Life had rhythm now, a steady heartbeat that could be felt in every sound and movement. The Iana district, center of Uruk's spiritual life, displayed some of the most advanced architecture of its time. Brick platforms rose layer by layer, their edges aligned with cardinal directions. Some walls still hold impressions of reed mats used as molds, delicate patterns fossilized in clay. Fragments of copper tools discovered here measure between 8 and 14 centimeters, shaped with remarkable precision. Archaeologists believe these tools were used in both temple construction and artisan work. Even the debris reveals sophistication: pigments from crushed hematite and malachite, charred date pits, and broken ceramic cones once pressed into decorative mosaics. It was a world built not just for function, but for meaning. Astronomy played a growing role in daily life. Priests observed the sky from raised platforms, tracking the movements of Venus, Jupiter, and the Moon with keen attention. They noticed cycles: the 584-day dance of Venus, the lunar months that guided planting seasons, the subtle shift of star risings across decades. These observations shaped early calendars and rituals. Imagine a warm night atop a temple terrace, the air filled with the faint smell of oil lamps, the sky deep and shimmering. The stars would not just be distant lights. They would be reminders, markers of time, guides for ceremonies, quiet witnesses to human effort. In 3100 BCE, just after sunrise in Uruk, a young scribe named Enlil-Maki sat cross-legged inside a small recording chamber near the Iana temple. The room smelled of damp clay and reed fibers. Thin slivers of morning light slipped through a narrow window, illuminating rows of freshly shaped tablets laid out to dry. His reed stylus rested lightly between his fingers as he prepared for the day's work. Merchants arrived first, bringing baskets of barley, fish, and woven cloth. Enlil-Maki pressed his stylus into soft clay, creating wedge-shaped signs that captured quantities and names. Each stroke produced a faint scratching sound. Sweat gathered at his temples as the room warmed. A temple steward entered next, requesting records for offerings, jars of oil, handfuls of incense, a tally of goats. Enlil-Maki recorded each detail carefully, shaping symbols measuring just a few millimeters in height. By midday, more than 20 tablets covered the drying shelves. His fingertips were coated in clay dust. His stylus had worn slightly at the tip. The rhythm continued: receive, record, review, until the light softened into late afternoon gold. As the sun lowered, Enlil-Maki stepped outside, stretching his tired hands. The city hummed quietly. Smoke drifted from bread ovens, and long shadows stretched across the courtyard. He placed the last dried tablet into a reed basket for storage. His work, simple in appearance, shaped the foundation of written history. The marks he pressed into clay would outlive him by thousands of years. Daily life across the cities carried a mix of simplicity and grandeur. Workers shaped mud bricks by hand, leaving faint fingerprints still visible today. Children played near canals, tossing pebbles into water and watching ripples spread outward. Fishermen guided small reed boats using long wooden poles. Meanwhile, monumental construction unfolded. Ziggurat foundations rose layer by layer, each step measured precisely. Some platforms reached lengths of more than 60 meters, built from tens of thousands of bricks. In workshops, artisans crafted cylinder seals, tiny carved stones no longer than 4 centimeters. When rolled across clay, they revealed intricate scenes of gods, animals, and ceremonial processions. The images were detailed enough to show braided hair, patterned clothing, even expressions. These seals acted as signatures, personal marks of identity in a growing bureaucratic world. Trade networks expanded further. Boats transported goods along the rivers, their hulls coated in bitumen to prevent leaks. Caravans crossed dry plains carrying wool textiles, obsidian, and precious stones. Urban economies became complex enough to require structured leadership, temple administration, and legal norms. The ordinary and extraordinary coexisted seamlessly. Take a breath here. Imagine walking through a bustling market street, the smell of dates and roasted fish, the sound of pottery clinking gently, the warmth of sunlight on smooth plaster walls. Above you, the sky stretches wide, bright, and ancient. Humanity has found its rhythm, and yet, within all this order and achievement, some things remained hidden beneath the surface. Mysteries waiting for those who listen to the past. When the Sumerian cities reached their full brilliance, their greatest achievements were not only architectural or administrative, they were symbolic. Entire districts were arranged with such deliberate orientation that walking through them felt like moving through a vast instrument built to measure time, honor the gods, and reflect the sky itself. If you entered Nippur around 2600 BCE, the air would feel warm and dry against your skin, carrying the faint scent of baked brick and incense drifting from temple courtyards. Beneath your feet, the ground would feel smooth, worn by generations of footsteps, and above you, the sky would stretch wide, a deep canvas against which rituals unfolded. Imagine approaching the Akur Temple, the sacred heart of Nippur. Its walls rose in clean geometric lines, coated with layers of plaster that made them gleam softly in sunlight. The entire complex was aligned with remarkable precision. Its central axis deviated only a few degrees from true north. Archaeologists measured its orientation carefully, a layout that appeared intentional, not accidental. Many scholars believe this alignment allowed priests to observe key celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and the risings of important stars. The temple was not simply a building, it was a frame through which the heavens could be read. Across the courtyards, priests prepared for rituals using carefully crafted instruments. Clay bowls bore traces of aromatic resins. Copper blades, often measuring 10-14 centimeters long, reflected sunlight in quick flashes. Reed flutes produced soft, wavering tones. Even these small details showed the sophistication of Sumerian culture. They turned ordinary objects into tools of ceremony, each chosen for texture, sound, or symbolic meaning. Daily life and cosmic order were no longer separate ideas. They overlapped quietly, shaping the rhythm of the city. Astronomy guided much of this rhythm. Priests recorded the movements of the moon, noting how its phases aligned with planting seasons and river behavior. They tracked the erratic yet patterned cycle of Venus, whose rising was tied to certain festivals. Imagine a group of observers standing on a temple terrace at dawn, the cool bricks beneath their feet, their eyes fixed on the horizon as a bright point of light emerged. That moment wasn't simply scientific, it was sacred, a sign that the world above and the world below moved in harmony. Around 2550 BCE, in the city of Lagash, a young temple attendant named Ninmala prepared for the annual first fire ritual. The courtyard stones felt warm beneath her sandals, even before sunrise. She carried a small bronze bowl filled with dried reeds, and the air around her held the faint smell of ash from last year's ceremony. She walked toward the central altar, a raised platform coated with smooth white plaster. Senior priests stood nearby, their robes trimmed with narrow bands of blue dye. As the sun's first light touched the eastern wall, Ninmala knelt, placed the bronze bowl on the platform, and struck a flint against a copper blade. Sparks scattered. A thin thread of smoke rose as the reeds caught fire. The flames grew slowly, casting a warm glow across the courtyard. Drums sounded gently. With each rising note, the fire strengthened. The priests chanted, their voices low and steady. People gathered at the edges of the courtyard, watching the light grow brighter and more stable. The ritual marked the symbolic renewal of the city, a reminder that order, warmth, and life began with fire. When the ceremony ended, Ninmala stepped back, her hands still warm from the heat. The fire burned cleanly and steadily, its light reflecting off copper vessels nearby. By evening, the flame would be transferred to household hearths throughout Lagash. Her task was complete. The city felt renewed. Rituals like these reveal how deeply the Sumerians linked cosmic cycles and earthly life. They believed the gods maintained balance, but that humans played a role in sustaining it. The careful timing of festivals, sometimes linked to lunar months, sometimes to solar transitions, was a way of participating in the rhythm of creation. The sky wasn't distant. It was part of the city's architecture, its ceremonies, its identity. Technological skill supported this worldview. By this period, Sumerian builders understood how to create multi-room structures with vaulted ceilings using simple materials. Kilns reached temperatures above 900 degrees, producing bricks strong enough to support multi-level temples. Bronze tools became more common, allowing artisans to carve more detailed seals and to shape stone with greater precision. Cylinder seals from this era show scenes of gods, animals, and worshippers with remarkable clarity. When rolled across soft clay, they produced patterns only 1 to 2 millimeters deep, but rich in symbolic meaning. Imagine holding one of these seals. Cool stone against your palm, delicate carvings visible only when light strikes at the right angle. Each seal was a world in miniature, a portable story carried through daily life. In a civilization where writing was still developing, images like these helped preserve ideas, beliefs, and identities. Across cities, astronomy continued to guide planning. Excavated courtyards show compass alignment. Doorways were crafted to catch morning light during specific seasons. Walls were built thick to maintain interior temperatures, demonstrating advanced understanding of climate. Sumerian cities were not random clusters of homes. They were structured environments reflecting both practical needs and cosmic principles. But beneath this order, small changes hinted at future shifts. Climatic patterns grew unpredictable. River courses changed slightly. Some agricultural yields declined. These signs were subtle, easy to overlook at the time, but they would eventually shape the next chapters of Sumerian history. When the Sumerian world reached its full expression, knowledge itself became a kind of architecture. Layered, deliberate, shaped with the same care as mud brick and stone. In cities like Ur, Uruk, and Nippur, learning was no longer a quiet background activity. It was a force that organized labor, shaped belief, measured time, and preserved identity. If you walked through a temple district around 2400 BCE, the air would feel warm against your skin, carrying the scent of clay tablets drying in the sun and the faint sweetness of oil lamps burning in shaded rooms. You would hear the soft scratch of styluses across wet clay, punctuated by murmured recitations as scribes practiced signs over and over again. Knowledge was becoming permanent. Imagine stepping into a scribal courtyard in Ur. The walls around you rise nearly 2 meters, their surfaces smooth from generations of hands brushing past them. Rows of low benches line the edges, each one supporting a small lump of clay waiting to be shaped. Young apprentices sit cross-legged on woven mats, pressing their styluses into tablets no bigger than the palm of a hand. Each wedge carries meaning: numbers, names, goods, prayers. The symbols are small, usually 3, 4, 5 millimeters tall, but together they form the backbone of the world's first written system. When archaeologists find these tablets today, many still hold the tiny fingerprints of their writers. Touching them feels like touching a moment of early human thought. As writing flourished, so did artistry. Cylinder seals reached new levels of refinement. Artisans carved scenes showing deities seated on thrones, sacred animals drinking from flowing streams, priests pouring offerings into tall vessels. The details are astonishing. Feathers carved with lines no wider than a hair, garments decorated with repeating geometric patterns. When rolled across clay, these seals created images that seemed to move with light, revealing how deeply the Sumerians understood composition and symbolic storytelling. Even in the smallest objects, the desire to record meaning shines through. Astronomy matured as well. Priests observed the stars from elevated platforms, tracking the movement of constellations with growing precision. They recognized the cycle of Sirius, the brightness of Venus at dawn, the long arc of Jupiter across the year. Some tablets from later periods preserve their calculations, sequences of numbers arranged in patterns that reflect patient, systematic observation. Imagine standing beside them at night, a warm breeze passing over the temple roof, the sky so clear that stars cast faint reflections on polished clay. These observers understood something profound. The heavens moved with order, and that order could be studied, anticipated, honored. Daily life reflected this growing structure. Workers shaped bricks in large pits, mixing clay, straw, and water until the texture felt just right, firm, cool, pliable. Children carried baskets of reeds from marshes, their feet leaving thin prints in soft soil that hardened under the sun. Merchants walked through narrow streets with goods balanced on their shoulders. Women ground grain with stone rubbers, creating soft rhythmic sounds that echoed across courtyards. In every movement, you could feel a civilization that had learned how to sustain itself, generation after generation. Religion deepened as well. Temples grew more complex, with inner chambers designed to hold statues, offerings, and ceremonial items. Some shrines included altars coated in crushed gypsum plaster, their surfaces smooth and pale, reflecting flickering lamplight. Priests performed rituals timed not only to agricultural cycles, but to celestial events. When the moon rose full, its light entered temple courtyards through narrow openings designed to catch the glow. These architectural choices reveal how carefully the Sumerians intertwined sky and earth, belief and daily life. A city was not just a place to live, it was a model of the cosmos. Of course, not all puzzles are solved. Why were certain constellations favored in ritual practice? Why did some temples orient slightly differently from others built in the same period? And how did scribes decide which myths and histories to record first? Archaeologists can examine clay tablets and temple foundations, measure orientations, analyze pigments, and reconstruct tools. But the intentions behind each choice, those remain partly hidden. That hiddenness holds its own quiet beauty. Take a slow breath. Picture the world around you, the warm glow of oil lamps in a scribal school, the soft sounds of styluses shaping meaning into clay, the distant hum of a bustling city finding its rhythm under a star-lit sky. Knowledge has become something stable, something that outlives its creators, and with that stability comes confidence. But beneath the confidence lies something else, a sense that the world holds layers still unexplored, truths still hidden beneath the surface of cities and stories. When scholars began measuring the oldest Sumerian temples with modern tools, they discovered something unexpected beneath the surface of ordinary architecture. A set of consistent, deliberate alignments hidden in plain sight. If you stood inside one of these ancient sanctuaries at dawn, the cool plastered floor beneath your feet, the faint smell of oil lamps lingering in the air, you might not notice the pattern immediately. But as sunlight entered through narrow openings, it would fall at precise angles, illuminating specific walls, altars, or carvings. The temples were not arranged randomly, they were tuned to the sky. Archaeological surveys in Ur, Eridu, and Nippur show that many early sanctuaries deviate only 3 to 5 degrees from true north. This precision is far greater than chance. One interpretation suggests practical reasons. These alignments may have helped builders track shadow lengths for seasonal measurement. Another proposes something deeper, that early priests designed temples as earthly reflections of the heavens. Perhaps they believed order on earth mirrored order above. What if the silent stillness of the temple interior was meant to echo the patient rhythms of the stars? Imagine standing within the Iana complex in Uruk. The central hall is dim, cool, quietly echoing. As the sun rises, a thin blade of light slips along the eastern wall, tracing a line carved centuries earlier. The effect is subtle, almost hidden, yet it repeats with steady accuracy throughout the year. Some researchers argue this demonstrates early solar observation. Others believe the alignment symbolized the renewal of cosmic power each morning. Beneath these competing interpretations lies one truth. The Sumerians paid attention to light in ways more deliberate than we once assumed. Modern archaeologists also found intriguing clues in the construction of ziggurat stairways. Their angles, measured between 30 and 42 degrees, match the apparent rising angle of certain stars as seen from southern Mesopotamia around 2500 BCE. Perhaps this is coincidence, or perhaps the structures were designed to echo celestial ascent, a symbolic path linking earth to sky. What if priests climbed these steps not just to reach a higher vantage point, but to enact a journey reflecting the movement of stars across the horizon? Beneath several temples, geophysical surveys revealed compacted clay layers arranged in alternating patterns. These layers, roughly 8 to 12 centimeters thick, create stable foundations that distribute weight evenly. Mainstream archaeologists explain them as practical engineering, early builders preventing subsidence in marshy ground. Yet alternative researchers point out their rhythmic layering: clay, gravel, clay, ash. Could these sequences have carried symbolic meaning as well? The Sumerians often paired ritual with construction. Perhaps the hidden layers were offerings in themselves, silent prayers embedded in the earth. Inside temple storerooms, archaeologists uncovered objects that deepen the mystery. Stone bowls with perfectly symmetrical interiors, their walls polished so finely they still reflect light. Copper tools shaped with surprising uniformity. Clay tablets arranged deliberately near altars, their impressed signs facing upward. Some scholars interpret these as practical ritual tools, But others wonder whether the precision reflects a lost understanding of acoustics or resonance. Several temple interiors have unusual echo patterns: soft, delayed, soothing. It's possible these spaces were tuned intentionally to amplify chants or to create a sense of stillness that settled slowly over those who entered. Astronomy offers even more questions. Certain temples in Ur and Uruk align with the heliacal rising of Venus, a phenomenon the Sumerians documented extensively. Perhaps this alignment helped priests anticipate seasonal changes. Or maybe Venus held symbolic power beyond simple observation. Its bright appearance just before dawn may have represented renewal, guidance, or the hidden dialogue between night and morning. What if the entire temple served as a kind of instrument, calibrating human ritual to cosmic timing? And then there are the figurines. Many were buried beneath thresholds, placed quietly into foundation trenches. Their faces are stylized, their bodies elongated, their surfaces polished smooth. Mainstream scholarship views them as protective symbols, guardians of the household or temple. But alternative interpretations ask whether their positions relate to astronomical orientation. Some face east toward the rising sun. Others face north, where stars move in slow, circular paths. The intention behind these placements remains partly veiled, and perhaps that veil is the point. Some knowledge may have been meant for ritual specialists alone. Take a breath. Picture a dim temple interior, the scent of incense smoldering softly, the stone cool beneath your hand. Imagine the moment sunlight slips across the floor, its path measured and known. Imagine the stillness, the patience, the quiet intelligence embedded in every alignment. The Sumerians did not shout their cosmic understanding. They built it quietly into their walls, their floors, their stairways. Beneath the visible city lay an unseen architecture of meaning. And even now, modern science has not answered everything. Why do certain temples share alignments while others differ? Why were specific stars favored in symbolic systems? And how much knowledge was lost when the last priests set down their styluses? Some mysteries remain exactly where the Sumerians left them, unexplained, unspoken, waiting beneath the surface. When archaeologists first began cataloging the artistic symbols carved and painted across Sumerian artifacts, they expected decoration, not communication. But as patterns emerged, spirals, stars, stepped shapes, serpents, rosettes, it became clear that beneath the surface of Sumerian art lay a quiet, hidden language. A language not written with words, but with forms. If you held one of these ancient objects in your hands today, its surface smooth from centuries of stillness, you might sense that the meaning goes deeper than its size suggests. Symbols were memory. Symbols were power. Symbols were the threads that held their world together. Imagine standing inside a dim storage room in Ur, the air cool and nearly silent. Shelves built of mud brick hold rows of artifacts: clay plaques, stone bowls, copper amulets. Carvings show repeated motifs: a star with 8 points, a figure holding a flowing vessel, a serpent coiled beneath a stepped shape. Mainstream scholars identify these as common religious icons: Inanna's star, the water god streams, the underworld serpent. But alternative researchers propose something broader, that the symbols represent not just deities, but cosmic forces. Perhaps the 8-pointed star links to Venus, rising and setting in predictable cycles. Perhaps the stepped shapes echo ziggurats because both reference mountains, real or imagined. What if these symbols acted as a bridge between human experience and cosmic order, Cylinder seals offer some of the most compelling evidence. When rolled across clay, they reveal scenes in astonishing detail. Some show constellations rendered as animals or divine figures. Others depict two beings, often interpreted as priests or gods, standing before a stepped platform beneath a star. The alignment of elements feels intentional. It's possible these scenes illustrate myths. It's equally possible they encode astronomical knowledge. Beneath each interpretation lies a deeper question. Were these images simply stories, or were they part of an unseen system of knowledge preserved through symbolism? Silence plays a central role here. The Sumerians rarely labeled their symbols in writing. They assumed the viewer understood the meaning. That assumption leaves modern scholarship with gaps, quiet spaces that resist definitive answers. In those spaces, wonder lives. Perhaps the rosette carved into bowls represents fertility. Maybe it mirrors a real plant. Or maybe it marks the recurring bloom of celestial cycles. Stillness holds these possibilities gently, without forcing a conclusion. Some artifacts deepen the mystery further. At the site of Lagash, archaeologists uncovered a group of stone discs, each roughly 15 to 20 centimeters in diameter. Their surfaces bear shallow grooves arranged in radiating patterns. Mainstream interpretation sees them as decorative objects or game pieces. Yet a few scholars question their precision. The grooves are evenly spaced within millimeters. Could they have been used to track time, to measure shadow lengths, to map something hidden in the sky? The evidence is incomplete, but the symmetry suggests intention. Perhaps these tools were part of a practice we no longer fully understand. Symbolism extended into architecture as well. Many ziggurats had 3 or 7 levels, numbers that appear frequently in Sumerian myth. 7 gates of the underworld, 3 realms of existence. These patterns repeat across texts and structures. What if the builders chose these numbers not for convenience but for meaning? Modern archaeologists note that the widths of certain temple terraces measure in repeating ratios, 1.3.6. These ratios appear again in ceremonial objects. Coincidence is possible. Pattern is also possible. The quiet repetition suggests something woven beneath the surface of practical design. Imagine the artisans who carved these symbols. Their hands steady, their tools simple but precise. They worked slowly, the sound of scraping stone or pressing clay echoing softly in enclosed rooms. They weren't simply decorating objects. They were embedding memory, storing ideas in forms that outlived voices. This is a kind of technology, though not one powered by metal or fire. It is a technology of meaning, one that uses silence, shape, and repetition to preserve knowledge. Alternative interpretations go even further. Some researchers propose that certain motifs reflect lost methods of observation, a way of tracking celestial cycles without written tables. Others argue the symbolism encoded spiritual teachings, guiding initiates through layers of understanding. Still others suggest that some symbols survived for so long because they represented natural patterns, flood cycles, river movements, the steady rising of stars. Each theory carries fragments of truth. None offers a complete picture, and maybe that incompleteness is intentional. Symbolic systems often protect their deepest layers by revealing only part of the structure. Take a breath here. Picture a craftsman carving a rosette into wet clay, the symbol small yet deliberate. Imagine the stillness of the room, the faint echo of distant activity outside, the warm clay yielding beneath his fingers. Symbols were not rushed, they were patient. They emerged from a world that valued both precision and meaning. And despite all modern analysis, some symbols remain resistant to translation. Their meanings rest hidden beneath centuries of interpretation, untouched, yet present. Each discovery deepens the mystery instead of resolving it. Now, beneath all these artistic and symbolic layers lies another hidden dimension: the technological and material achievements the Sumerians mastered, some of which modern scholars still debate. When archaeologists study the material world of the Sumerians, the bricks, metals, pigments, and tools, they often find a quiet sophistication hidden beneath surfaces that look simple at first glance. A mud brick is just a mud brick, until its composition reveals a recipe tuned for climate. A copper blade is just a tool, until its alloy shows remarkable consistency across distant cities. If you held one of these objects today, its surface cool and still in your palm, you might feel a modest texture. But beneath that texture lies a world of knowledge shaped through patience, experimentation, and memory. Imagine walking through the remains of an ancient workshop near ancient Ur around 2400 BCE. The air would feel warm, drifting with the dry smell of crushed clay and the sharper scent of heated metal. Clay molds lie scattered near a kiln, their interiors polished from repeated use. When archaeologists examined these molds, some only 6 to 8 centimeters in length, they found them shaped with remarkable precision. Mainstream scholars see evidence of standardized tools. Alternative researchers wonder whether the consistency hints at a deeper system of measurement. What if early Sumerian craftsmen used ratios rather than simple estimation, a quiet geometry encoded in the objects they made? Kilns themselves hold secrets. Excavated kiln chambers show burn marks that reach temperatures above 900 degrees, far higher than one might expect from simple reed or wood fuel. Perhaps the design amplified airflow. Maybe the builders understood how to shape chambers to trap heat efficiently. What if some techniques were passed down orally and never recorded? Beneath the visible craft lies an unseen engineering, a technology that combined intuition, observation, and generations of refinement. Copperwork reveals similar puzzles. Tools found in Lagash and Kish display consistent alloy composition, roughly 88 to 92% copper and 8 to 12% arsenic. This mixture created harder, more durable metal. Modern metallurgists note that achieving this ratio by accident is unlikely. The arsenic content varies only slightly across hundreds of samples. This suggests intentionality, a lost understanding of smelting temperatures and ore combinations. Mainstream scholarship calls it empirical knowledge. Alternative theories propose that specific ores were chosen deliberately from known regions. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Stillness holds the unanswered question quietly. Hidden beneath certain temple floors, archaeologists found thick layers of bitumen, black, sticky, aromatic, used as both adhesive and waterproofing. It seals foundations. It lines waterways. It coats boat hulls with a smooth, glossy finish. This material, sourced from natural seepages in the region, appears in layers 2 to 4 centimeters thick. Its resilience surprised researchers. Some bitumen layers remain intact after more than 4,000 years. Perhaps the knowledge of mixing bitumen with fine sand or clay created a compound that resisted cracking. What if builders understood micro-textures of Earth in ways we seldom acknowledge? Astronomical observation required its own quiet technologies. Clay tablets used for sky tracking were often shaped with a slight concavity on one side, no more than a few millimeters deep. allowing priests to align them more accurately when drawing star paths. Some tablets include tiny perforations, possibly used for sighting. Mainstream explanations see these as simple aids, but alternative interpretations consider them part of a larger observational toolkit, now incomplete. Beneath each explanation lies the same gentle uncertainty. We know what these objects are. We do not fully know how they were used. Pigments used in art also point toward hidden methods. The deep blue, used to represent the goddess Inanna, came from crushed lapis lazuli, a stone sourced more than 2,000 kilometers away. The powder, mixed with gypsum or animal fat, produced a paint that adhered smoothly to clay and plaster. Chemists analyzing surviving samples were surprised by its stability. The blue remains vibrant even after millennia. Perhaps artisans experimented with binders until they found one that resisted fading. Perhaps they were guided by ritual knowledge, color as symbol as well as craft. The connection between material and meaning remains partly obscured. Some constructions leave even more lasting questions. Foundations beneath major temples include layers of compacted earth, alternating with thin sheets of baked clay. These layers, often measuring 3.5 centimeters each, dissipate stress and stabilize heavy structures. Modern engineers recognize the method as effective. But how did early builders discover it? Trial and error over generations? Careful listening to the land, observing where soil settled, where it resisted. The unseen technology may have been sensory rather than mathematical, built on touch, sight, and patience. Take a slow breath. Picture a workshop at dusk, copper tools cooling on stone benches, clay molds stacked neatly, the kiln's warmth fading into evening stillness. These were not mystical technologies. They were human ones, refined through practice, preserved through memory, and made possible by a world that valued attentive craft. And yet, even with all we know, some techniques remain half understood. How precise were their measurements? Did they use harmonics or acoustics in temples? Were certain pigments chosen for resonance as well as color? The absence of complete answers creates space for wonder, a reminder that not all knowledge survives the passage of time. When we reach this layer of Sumerian history, the layer where archaeology ends and interpretation begins, the questions grow quieter, softer, yet somehow more persistent. These are not questions that demand answers. They are questions that sit beneath the surface of ruins, like slow-moving currents beneath a riverbed. If you stood among the broken foundations of ancient Eridu at dusk, the ground warm beneath your feet, the wind carrying the faint scent of reeds, you might feel the weight of these questions even before you could put them into words. Some scholars believe the early Sumerians saw themselves as participants in a cosmic drama, one shaped by gods whose origins were older than memory. Others suggest their myths were metaphors for environmental struggle, reflecting floods, droughts, and shifting rivers. And a few imagine something deeper, perhaps even a distant recollection of cultural contact now lost to time. Maybe each interpretation holds a fragment of truth. Maybe none provide a complete picture. We may never know. When we examine their oldest texts, the first puzzles emerge. In the creation stories, the gods descend from the sky, bringing knowledge, order, and laws. Perhaps this language is symbolic, echoing the importance of rain and starlight. Or maybe it reflects the human tendency to see the sacred in anything that arrives from above. Others propose these stories preserve ancient migrations, groups traveling from distant highlands into the river plain. The evidence hints in many directions. The silence between lines is part of what gives these myths their power. Consider the flood stories. Tablets found at Shurupak and Nippur, some written around 1800 BCE, others copied even later, describe a catastrophic deluge that reshaped the world. Mainstream scholars connect these stories to real geological events, sudden river changes, basin floods, perhaps even Black Sea expansions. Yet some researchers wonder whether the scale described points to something larger. Maybe these narratives compress generations of memory into a single event, or maybe they reflect encounters with a sea-level rise that communities were not equipped to explain. We may never know fully what the storytellers intended. Another question lies in the sudden rise of Sumerian complexity. Villages became cities with astonishing speed. Writing emerged, irrigation expanded, temple networks flourished. Some archaeologists see this as the natural result of environmental opportunity, two great rivers providing fertile land. Others suggest population pressure, resource management, and trade triggered rapid innovation. And a few propose something more mysterious, that the spark of Sumerian civilization came from ideas carried from even older, now lost cultures. Perhaps this is possible. Or maybe civilizations often appear sudden only because the evidence of their early stages has not survived. The earth is patient, but it does not keep every record. Symbolism raises more questions still. Why did some constellations matter more than others? Why were certain numbers, 3, 7, 12, woven into architecture, myths, and ritual sequences? Some scholars believe these were practical frameworks, markers of astronomical cycles or agricultural patterns. Others argue they formed part of a spiritual code, guiding practitioners through layers of meaning. Maybe the truth sits quietly between these ideas, neither fully practical nor fully mystical, but something gently combining both. We may never know how each symbol felt to those who touched it daily. Even the landscape invites wonder. Rivers migrated over centuries, shifting the boundaries of cities. Marshlands expanded and contracted. Some ancient canals now lie far from the rivers that fed them. Perhaps this environmental instability shaped Sumerian belief in cycles of destruction and renewal. Or maybe the people themselves created these cycles through irrigation, inadvertently transforming their world. The interplay between nature and culture remains partially hidden, like the faded outlines of old waterways visible only from the air. Take a breath here. Consider how many layers these questions hold. We can measure walls, analyze pigments, date artifacts, interpret inscriptions. But intention, the quiet heartbeat behind a choice, often slips beyond reach. Maybe that is why these mysteries endure. They remind us that ancient people lived with complexities we cannot fully reconstruct. Cross-cultural comparisons add more texture. Egyptian myths speak of divine kingship descending from the heavens. Early Chinese legends mention sky-born rulers teaching agriculture. Mesoamerican stories describe gods shaping calendars and stars. Perhaps these parallels arise from shared human imagination, the need to understand forces larger than ourselves. Or maybe they reflect migrations and cultural exchanges far older than we once assumed. Each theory opens more pathways. We may never know which ones lead to origins and which to coincidence. And beneath all these uncertainties lies the gentlest question of all. Why did the Sumerians choose to record some stories and not others? Why preserve lists of kings, but not the origins of their symbols? Why carve certain patterns into stone while leaving others to silence? Maybe answers were never the point. Maybe mystery itself was part of their worldview, part of what made the world feel alive. When we reach this final layer of inquiry, the layer where archaeology blurs softly into philosophy, the questions feel different. They are quieter, wider, more patient. They move the way evening light moves across old foundations, slowly, without insisting on a destination. If you stood among the ruins of ancient Nippur at twilight, the ground cooling beneath your feet, a faint breeze brushing past your shoulders, you might sense how these questions linger, untouched by the passing of millennia. Some mysteries simply live here. One of the most persistent questions concerns why the Sumerians believed knowledge descended from the heavens. Some scholars believe this was metaphor, a poetic way to describe inspiration, rainfall, or the reliable movement of stars. Others suggest the myths reflect real migrations, people arriving from distant mountain regions with agricultural skills. And a few imagine something even older, perhaps memories carried from forgotten cultures whose origins remain invisible in the archaeological record. Maybe each theory contributes a thread. Maybe the full tapestry is no longer available to us. We may never know. The question of why Sumerian civilization rose where it did also invites debate. Mainstream archaeologists point to geography, rich alluvial soil, river-fed agriculture, access to trade routes. Others propose that environmental instability pushed communities to cooperate, innovate, and organize quickly. And a smaller group wonders whether remnants of earlier settlements, now eroded or buried, played a guiding role. Perhaps ancient people found ruins and built atop them, inheriting shapes and orientations they did not fully understand. Maybe this helped seed their myths of earlier ages. We may never know how much of their world was inherited and how much was created. Then there is the matter of the Anunnaki themselves, figures described in texts as powerful beings who shaped human destiny. Mainstream scholars view them as deities, reflections of natural forces and social order. Others suggest they represent ancestral heroes, remembered through mythic language. A few propose interpretations that stretch further, imagining the Anunnaki as cultural memories of long-lost civilizations with advanced knowledge. Perhaps these stories evolved from simple roots into complex narratives over centuries. Or maybe they preserved something meaningful beneath metaphor. The line between symbol and memory remains quiet, unmarked. We may never know where it stands. Questions about writing also invite reflection. Why did writing appear so suddenly, so fully formed? Some scholars argue it evolved from tally systems and accounting tokens. Others believe temple administration accelerated its development, creating a need for record keeping. But a smaller group points out that early cuneiform already shows complexity that typically emerges slowly. Perhaps communities experimented with writing long before our surviving evidence. Perhaps fragile early forms simply vanished. Or perhaps writing crystallized when social, economic, and spiritual needs converged. The silence of lost tablets makes this one of history's gentler unknowns. We may never know the full story. Consider the ziggurats, those stepped mountains rising above ancient plains. Some archaeologists argue they symbolize the cosmic mountain, the meeting place of heaven and earth. Others suggest they served practical functions, elevating temples above floodwaters. And Apartsadtius, few researchers notice alignments with solstices or significant stars. Perhaps the truth blends all three. Maybe the builders shaped these structures with layered intention, symbolic, practical, astronomical. The meaning may have shifted with each generation. We may never know precisely how these sacred platforms felt to the people who climbed their steps under starlit skies. Another question lingers in the background. Why did the Sumerians associate destruction with renewal? Flood myths, seasonal rituals, agricultural cycles, all weave creation and destruction into a single rhythm. Some scholars see agricultural symbolism. Others connect it to the unpredictable behavior of rivers. A few suggest that deeper spiritual ideas shaped their worldview, the belief that order must be restored repeatedly. Perhaps this idea came from lived experience. Perhaps it came from observation of nature. Maybe it came from something older still, carried quietly through generations. We may never know what first taught them that endings and beginnings walk together. Cross-cultural comparisons widen these questions. Egyptian, Hindu, Mayan, and early Chinese traditions also describe cycles of destruction and renewal. Heavenly beings teaching early humans, celestial markers guiding rituals. Maybe these similarities reflect universal human patterns, the need to orient ourselves in a vast world. Or maybe they hint at ancient exchanges, migrations, shared stories carried across continents. A few researchers imagine a deeper connection to global environmental events, like floods or volcanic eruptions. The possibilities are many. Answers remain few. Take a slow breath with me here. Picture yourself walking between ancient walls, the air still, the ground warm beneath your palm as you steady yourself. In that quiet space, the questions soften. They no longer ask for solutions. They invite reflection. They remind us that some mysteries endure because they connect us across time, across cultures, across landscapes, to the part of ourselves that seeks meaning. And perhaps that is the point. Maybe the ancient world is not incomplete. Maybe it simply speaks in a language we are still learning to hear. When the great Sumerian cities finally quieted, when canals dried, when temples fell into warm heaps of sun-baked dust, when writing ceased on tablets left half-finished, something remarkable happened. The world did not forget them completely. Threads of memory, thin yet persistent, slipped across millennia. If you walked through the ruins of Ur in the 19th century, before systematic excavation began, you would have seen only mounds rising gently from the plain. Yet beneath your feet, entire histories waited in patient stillness. Civilizations fall, but memory, in its own slow way, endures. Some of the earliest preservation came through myth. Long after Sumerian cities vanished, their stories survived in Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian texts. Kings listed in Sumerian chronicles reappeared in later writings. Rituals that began in early temple courtyards echoed in later religious systems. Even now, scholars trace linguistic roots across thousands of years, finding familiar shapes in unfamiliar scripts. Perhaps memory does not disappear. Perhaps it just changes form, carried by stories, names, melodies, and symbols that outlive the people who first shaped them. Even today, echoes of Sumerian cosmology appear in later Mesopotamian myths, revealing how deeply their ideas shaped the region. The rediscovery of Sumer began in earnest in the mid-1800s. European archaeologists, guided by travelers' reports and local knowledge, began excavating sites like Ur, Eridu, and Lagash. Beneath layers of dust, they found tablets, walls, figurines, and tools preserved exactly where they had been left. Some tablets still held the fingerprints of their ancient writers, pressed into clay nearly 5,000 years earlier. These discoveries astonished the modern world. Entire languages emerged from the mounds. Worlds once thought mythical became real again. Even now, thousands of tablets remain untranslated, each one a tiny doorway into a vanished life. Imagine an archaeologist in 1922 brushing soft dust away from the royal tombs of Ur. The air is warm, the ground dry, the faint scent of earth rising with every stroke. As the worker reveals delicate gold jewelry, lyres decorated with bull's heads, and lapis lazuli beads, the sense of continuity becomes unmistakable. These objects, crafted with patient skill, were buried with honor. They were meant to accompany someone into the next world, and still today they teach us about the people who shaped them. Even now, the craftsmanship speaks across time, reminding us how similar we remain: curious, creative, hopeful. Or consider a modern researcher holding a clay tablet under laboratory lights. The symbols measure only a few millimeters each, yet they carry entire systems of knowledge: flood records, grain tallies, star cycles, myths of origins. Technology allows researchers to scan tablets without touching them, revealing inscriptions hidden beneath damaged surfaces. Some tablets, once thought blank, now show faint writing. Perhaps memory chooses when to reveal itself. Perhaps the past and the present work together, slowly, deliberately. Even now, new readings reshape what we know about ancient cities. But memory is not just archaeological, it is cultural. The Sumerian invention of writing shaped every literate civilization that followed. Their early mathematics, base 60 counting, geometric ratios, standardized weights, still influence how we measure angles, time, and space. Their myths inspired later epics, including the stories of Gilgamesh, Inanna, and the Great Flood. Even today, we find fragments of Sumerian worldview woven into modern systems of law, agriculture, and astronomy. Continuity moves quietly, but steadily. We can also see a strange symmetry in how ancient knowledge is rediscovered. When early Sumerian astronomers traced the path of Venus, they watched patterns unfold across the sky. Today, astrophysicists use satellites and telescopes to track similar cycles with different tools. When Sumerian builders shaped clay into bricks, they observed textures, temperatures, and stability. Today, engineers analyze materials at microscopic scales. Even now, the search for understanding links us across time. Perhaps curiosity itself is the true legacy, a shared impulse that does not fade. Take a breath here. Picture a clay tablet resting in your hands, its surface cool, its edges worn smooth by centuries of stillness. Imagine the stars above you, the same stars that looked down on Sumerian cities long before writing began. They have not changed. Their light arrives now, as it did then, patient and steady. Continuity stretches across time in ways we barely notice. Perhaps the stars preserve a memory of everything beneath them. Modern excavation continues to reveal new details. Archaeologists still find sealed rooms, buried tools, entire neighborhoods hidden under meters of sediment. Even today, satellite imagery reveals ancient canals invisible from the ground. Ground-penetrating radar uncovers temple outlines. Chemical analysis identifies pigments on statues once thought unpainted. Each discovery feels like a conversation resumed after a long pause. The past speaks, we listen, and even now, new questions rise gently from the dust. Cycles of remembering and forgetting shape every civilization. The Sumerians built cities, stories, rituals, and technologies that lasted for centuries. Then they fell quiet. Time covered their memories in layers of earth. But the layers did not erase the story. They preserved it. They waited. And when people returned, curiosity brought the past back into the light. Perhaps this is the quiet lesson Sumer offers us. What we create, Our knowledge, our stories, our symbols may survive in ways we cannot predict. They may fall silent for a while, but silence is not absence. Silence can be preservation. When we arrive at this final moment, the long path through ancient cities and quiet ruins settles into something gentler. The questions grow softer. The images drift into their places, and you return slowly to the present world around you. The air you're breathing now, the quiet of your room, the rhythm of your own thoughts. None of it is separate from the story you've just traveled through. It sits beside you, not as noise, but as calm understanding, the kind that doesn't need conclusions, only presence. Imagine the ruins of Ur at dusk, the sky fading into a muted blue. The ground feels warm beneath your hand, holding heat long after the sun has lowered. A small breeze moves across the broken walls, touching them lightly, almost thoughtfully. Even now, that same breeze crosses the desert. Even now, the same silence rests between fallen stones. Time moves, but it does not erase everything. Some things remain steady, patient, unmoved by centuries. The stars above the plain rise in the same patterns that ancient priests once traced. Their light is unchanged, arriving from distances so deep they almost feel like memory. As you sit here listening, let that continuity reach you. Let it settle gently. The ancient world may feel far away, yet its rhythm echoes quietly in your breath. Long before you, people watch the night sky the same way, searching for order, comfort, meaning. Long before you, someone pressed a symbol into soft clay, hoping it might preserve a thought. And long before you, the rivers shaped lives with their steady cycles of flood and renewal. Perhaps this is the softness hidden in history, the reminder that we are not separate from those who walked before us. We move through different ages, but the questions, the wonder, the desire to understand, these remain. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders release just a little more. You don't need to solve anything now. Some mysteries are meant to remain open, not to frustrate us, but to give us space. The same way open sky gives room for stars to breathe. Even now, archaeologists uncover new fragments of the past. Even today, unexpected discoveries rewrite small pieces of the story. And even with all that knowledge, much remains unspoken beneath layers of earth. That silence isn't a barrier. It's part of the truth. A quiet acknowledgement that the world does not reveal everything at once. Picture yourself walking along the edge of an ancient mound. The wind brushes past. The light changes slowly. In the distance, the horizon softens into evening. You feel how old the land is, how many footsteps have crossed it, how many voices have gone quiet. And yet, there is no sadness here, only continuity, only the sense that life does not disappear. It shifts, transforms, becomes part of something larger than memory. The past moves beneath the surface like water beneath sand, unseen but always present. As this journey comes to rest, hold a simple image. Wind still moving over ruins, stars still watching, stones still remembering. These things continue whether or not we witness them. They continue gently, without urgency, without expectation. The story of the Sumerians, like every story held by the earth, becomes part of that ongoing stillness. It touches the present, then drifts quietly back into the long flow of time. And here, in this soft moment, you can let the story fade, just as night settles over the plain. No sharp ending, no final answer, only a slow exhale, only the quiet sense that the world is larger, older, and more patient than we can ever fully understand. And the stillness continues.